I want to thank everybody who's joined tonight. Many of you have heard Ken Regelson speak before. We're in for a big treat. I'm really excited about it. Mary Pettigrew, who's been foundational to Empower Our Future, which is the Boulder Group, is going to introduce Ken and give you some more information. We want to thank you so much for showing up tonight. And Mary, I'll turn it over to you to introduce the speaker.
Great. Thank you, Leslie. Tonight, we are so pleased to welcome Ken Regelson. He speaks on energy in clear and engaging ways to audiences of all experience levels, energy nerds to regular folk, as he says. He's got a master's degree in electrical engineering and 21 years of experience in modeling and analysis of an energy grid based on renewables. For 5 years, Ken was a policy analyst at the State Capitol and Public Utilities Commission, representing Colorado's solar installers. For much of last year, Ken had 5 interns working on key grid impact questions of high levels of renewables and energy policy. Not surprisingly, his mother loves him very much.
Well, thank you very much for that great introduction. We have made appropriate obsequiences to the gods of Zoom. With that, without further ado, let me share my screen all the way. So this is my mom. She was 85 when this picture was taken. She's plugging in an electric car. And I'm willing to bet that if she can figure it out, most of you can also. So we're going to be talking about making miles while the sun shines and why charging EVs is cheap is good for everybody's electric bill. I tend to think of this as miles and smiles from sun and wind. Now, my favorite quote, this is just a little bit about me and my nonprofit. My favorite quote is from hockey great Wayne Gretzky. I skate to where the puck is going to be, not where it has been. My favorite bumper sticker is don't believe everything you think. And energy should exist to drive a rapid transition to a reliable, reasonable cost renewable energy future based on data-driven actions. And the 2 key phrases here are rapid and data-driven. I want to see as much as possible hourly data about what's going on. And I like my data to be actionable, that the data itself describes what our actions should be. So this is kind of our outline. Most of these are actually pretty short topics. Driving action, how do we drive action provide information that will make people want to drive action. The energy big picture, electricity's rapid transition, which is already well on its way, rapid transition for electric cars, the best places to use and store the surplus, and we'll talk about surplus. And finally, time of renewables and cheap to charge. Now, this is my wife and I. We're part of a group that likes to get dressed up, which turns out an awful lot of us have electric vehicles. This is our just new, now just a year, Kia Niro all-electric. We love it. So driving action, this is my friend Terry and her Tesla Model Y. Well, this is one way to drive action. Ford did a big poll that said 3 in 4 people surveyed said they'd prefer to date an electric vehicle owner. I think that will drive action. Fear is not such a good thing from my standpoint. So climate change, that's a big fear topic. Fear will stop people. They'd want to dig in, they want to dig in their heels, or they want to run. And that isn't the kind of action that we need. We need creative action in a direction that really moves us forward. So these are all creative actions, all actions that drive creativity. So dollars, something like cost is a good driver, particularly if you can offer something for free. Fun, that's a great driver for people. And actually, when I say competition here, I don't mean like I'm competing in a race against you. That can be fun too. But where 2 products are competing, say, just as an example, leading the audience a little bit here, electric vehicles versus internal combustion engines. At this point, for almost everything, they are better. And we'll talk about those little areas that still need to be fixed some. Hope is a great driver of action. Stories, particularly ones that are true and useful. Humor can be a great way of moving forward. Now, as an energy geek and talking to other energy geeks, we talk a lot about quads. That's quadrillion BTUs of energy. I don't think that drives very many people to action. Let me give you an example of something where we deal with cost and BTUs and why one is better than the other. So this is gasoline versus electric cars, and we're talking about light duty transportation, small cars, small SUVs, yeah, even medium-sized sedans. So fuel costs, gasoline, that's about 10 cents a mile. That's $3 a gallon, 30 miles per gallon, pretty reasonable estimates. Electricity is 3.4 cents per mile for charging an electric car. That's based on 12 cents a kilowatt hour. That's the average US residential rate of electricity in the United States. And 3.5 miles per kilowatt hour, that's actually another conservative number. Most smaller electric vehicles, not the giant ones, but the smaller ones, get 3.5 to 4.5 miles per kilowatt hour. Or BTU, we know how many BTUs are in a gallon of gasoline, so 4,000 BTUs per mile versus 920 electric BTUs per mile. It's just electricity is much more efficient. Well, saying that you get a quarter of the BTUs, that's not going to get very many people, but saying that you get a lot less cost per mile, that's pretty interesting. And maybe we can drive this forward. So plugging in for savings, this is more of a marketing pitch, 15,000 miles per year is $1,000 fuel savings per year. You save a lot on maintenance. Oh, there's no oil to change in an electric car. There's no spark plugs, points. There's no not very many moving parts within an electric car, an electric motor. Consumer Reports says over the life of a car, maintenance savings are $4,600 savings. That's over the entire life of the car. So let's take this over 10 years, and what you get is $15,000 total savings. This pays for any additional cost of the electric car. This pays for chargers, and this pays for infrastructure and savings to boot. So let's talk about the energy big picture. This is my friend Ricky. She loves her plug-in Chevy Volt. Can't imagine driving any other car, although she says her next car is going to be all electric, no gasoline. So plug-in has both gasoline and electric. Okay, and I said don't talk about quads of energy, and this is about quads of energy. This is called a Sankey, or a flow chart of energy. And these pipes, what's interesting about this chart is these pipes are proportional to each other. These rectangles are proportional to each other. I'm really not going to talk a lot about it, but you'll see this one a lot. Sometimes people call this a spaghetti chart. Now, if you think of this as lasagna noodle data, if you really want to see angel hair data, go look at this very detailed energy Sankey at energyliteracy.com. Now, we're going to have at the very end a slide that summarizes some of these links. And also, we will paste them into the chat so that it's easy to copy them. And you can always email any of us. We'd be happy to provide them on to you. In addition, there will be slides available in probably a few days and a video, and depending on how long it takes to do. Okay, well, this isn't very actionable, particularly for most people. It does help us understand some key issues, but it's not very actionable the way it is. I found this chart about 8 months ago, and I've been talking to people about this a lot. I love this chart. It speaks to me as an energy geek. It came from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, and it's based on the Energy Information Agency of the Department of Energy on 2015 data. So you have primary energy quads and CO2 million metric tons. I'm not going to talk a lot about this. You're welcome to ask questions about that funny NREL chart. What's interesting about it? The first thing that we noticed about 2 weeks into looking at this is there was no money version of this. And we called up NREL literally, and we said, boy, we love this chart. Where's the money? And they said, great idea. Well, fortunately, I have interns, and so I have an intern make me the cost chart. And so this is $1 billion, and this is for each of the different categories: transportation, industrial, residential, and commercial. This is light duty transportation right here. It's the biggest block of all, and that's proportional to the amount of money. Okay, we already know we don't want to talk about quads. Now, this is actionable. It's interesting data, and it's really hard for most people to understand. So can we simplify it and put together an action plan? So here it is. This is exactly the same data, except I think it's much easier for most people to recognize and see. So here we have the total spend for energy, and most of our greenhouse gases also coming from energy. So the US total for our fuel for our lives, that includes electricity, This is all of electricity for everything. And this is what's left of fossil fuels for the entire picture of fuel, thinking of electricity as fuel. 1,200 billion with a B dollars per year. And the million metric tons of CO2 that are produced. Now, they're in order: all transport, just fossil fuels; electricity; industry, just fossil fuels; space and water heating for both commercial and residential; and the rest, everything else that was on those other two charts that you saw. Okay, and what's interesting, and they're lined up the same way. And what's interesting is you have the biggest area, the biggest cost is transportation. And we already know that when we electrify transportation, our costs drop to about a third or less. Yeah, we'll add a little bit of cost for electricity, but when we electrify this, we drop quite a bit. And the top two greenhouse gases, far and away higher than the rest of them put together, are in transport and electricity. We'll be coming back to this chart some more, but in terms of actions, is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This makes the most sense. The biggest money and the biggest greenhouse gases. Next biggest money, next biggest greenhouse gases. Now I've scrunched this up because this is 2015, and I want to jump ahead to 2035. That'll be down here in a few minutes. So what actions do we think we can actually get to in 2035? Well, electrify 80% of transportation, 90% of renewable electricity. Maybe we get 50% of industry, of what's fossil fuel driven in industry. And a lot of that might be hydrogen generated on site, might not be. 50% electrification of heating from fossil fuels, and that'll be done with heat pumps. If we do that, then these charts drop to here. Maybe it's 2035, maybe it's a little different, maybe it's earlier, maybe not. Although I'm pretty hopeful. So we have what, a $350 billion per year savings, mostly from savings in fossil fuels for transportation. We've increased electricity some, and we still have a 30% drop in costs, and we have a 75% drop in million metric tons of CO2 output. This is within range of what scientists are telling us we probably need to get to very quickly. I think this is within our reach. We can do this. Now, I'm going to talk about electricity first because it's in progress right now. Rapid transition going on right now. Chevy Bolt all-electric, wonderful little car, one of the cheapest electric vehicles, range about 240, 250 miles, very quick car because it's so small with a big electric motor. So let's talk about an electric generation and transmission company that's up in northern Colorado. Platte River Power Authority, PRPA, they're a leader in transitioning to renewable electricity. They serve 4 cities. They exist to serve these 4 cities, and they are a nonprofit. They don't have shareholders, they have owners. Now you have to know about them that they provide some of the lowest cost electricity and highest reliability, not only in Colorado, but in the entire world. And that in 2014, they were about 20% renewable electricity, mostly hydro. Now they have 3 pillars that drives their company, their organization. The first and foremost and highest is reliability. These are the most sober people you're going to run into because they know that when the power goes out in some circumstances, like in Texas a month or 2 ago, people literally die. And that's not okay by them. They treat their job with remarkable seriousness. The second biggest topic for them, the second pillar, is cost. And the final pillar is environment. They do care about the environment. Now, if I had gone to them, if I'd been that smart, in 2014 and said, you will be at 50% renewables by 2020, they would have said, Ken, you are high. You're crazy. You're completely nuts. There's no possible way that we can be there. Renewables are much, much too expensive. And some of you know this already. In 2020, the middle of 2020, they achieved 50% renewable electricity. And it's simply because the cost of wind and solar went down so much. How much, you might ask? Well, 89% for solar. This is 2009. This is 2019. This is levelized cost of electricity. That captures the cost of building the power plants, installation, ongoing costs, well, not for fuel, because there is no fuel for solar and wind, but operating costs, maintenance costs over the lifetime of the power plant, interconnection costs, profit for the developers, all of those are factored into these costs. And here's wind that's dropped 70% in 10 years. Let's add to this. What about some of our fossil and other kinds of fuels? For coal costs are flat. They haven't changed very much. Nuclear's actually gone up when you're looking at new nuclear power plants. Natural gas is interesting. It has dropped fairly significantly. This is gas peaker plants, natural gas, relatively inefficient, but cheaper to buy at one point in time. And combined cycle plants are more efficient. Now, what's interesting about the cost of gas going down is it wasn't manufacturing scale, or it wasn't that the installation suddenly got cheaper. It was that the cost of gas dropped. In 2009, the Henry Hub natural gas cost was $4 a million BTU, and it's $2.60 in 2019. That accounts for almost all of the cost drops for the gas plants that are here. Spectacular drop in cost of electricity for renewables. That's what drove PRPA, why they went much faster than any of their plans ever said. So in 2019, they started on an integrated resource plan. It's about 150 pages, very sober look at everything, every aspect of a utility grid that you can think of. It makes interesting reading. It's actually pretty readable. It's pretty well done. And in November 2020, the board of directors approved a portfolio 2, which is zero coal. They're closing their coal-fired power plant. In 2014, there were 20% renewables and almost 80% coal. This is a remarkable change. 85% renewables, 90% carbon reduction by 2030. It includes big storage. That's included in the costs, and they believe that their costs will be business as usual. Well, that's Platte River Power Authority. What about the rest of the United States? 2035report.com. If you haven't read this report, you need to. Very credible, detailed. They talk a lot about what it takes to keep the grid lit. Every US state within its borders can have 90% clean, carbon-free electricity nationwide by 2035, dependably. The lights stay on, at no extra cost to consumers and without new fossil fuel plants, and with what they call modest investments in transmission. 2035report.com. Go check it out. Excel Colorado came out with their 90% carbon-free plan 2030 about 2 weeks ago. And it's still being analyzed. And if you're interested in that, ask a question about if you want to know more about Excel's ERP. Leslie and the company are going over that in detail. And 2 weeks ago, 2035report.com released their second report on transportation, saving trillions on transportation, trillions with a T. With the right policy, it is technically and economically feasible for all new car and truck sales to be electric in the United States by 2035, which would prevent 150,000 premature deaths and avoid $1.3 trillion in environmental and health costs, and would save consumers $2.7 trillion, mostly on fuel and on maintenance, and would support a net increase of over 2 million jobs in 2035. Go check those out. Well, why? And it's because solar and wind electricity are now cheaper than operating, maintaining, and fueling most fossil fuel generators. Never mind paying back capital costs. That means if you could build a coal-fired power plant for free, it would still cost more to operate, maintain, and fuel it than all-in costs, including profit for the developers for solar and wind. I'm going to sound like a 3-year-old for a second. Why? Well, this is my answer. These make the same amount of electricity per year. Competition in mass production always means costs go down. One coal-fired power plant, 425 wind turbines, and 13 million solar panels. This is like copying the Bible by hand. This is like a Gutenberg printing press, and this is like a high-speed digital press. The good news for storage, which we know we need, is that we're seeing investments to make billions of batteries for electric vehicles. And in fact, in 2015, not 2019, this isn't a typo, in 2015 in California, new battery storage beat new natural gas generation to meet peaking requirements. This is historic. I'll give you a quote. The best solar power schemes, this is English, in US English we'd say bids, now offer the cheapest electricity in history, cheaper than coal and gas in most major countries. International Energy Agency. Okay, 85, 90% renewable electricity. We're in rapid transition to that. We need to scale it to everybody. I think that PRPA, just like they way overperformed what they thought they were going to do from 2014 to 2020, that in 10 years, they're going to get up to 95% renewables. I think they will have no trouble doing that, and they'll do it cost effectively and, of course, reliably. But there are two big issues when we have renewables, and one is surplus. That's a cost issue, and the other is dark comms, reliability and cost. Dark comms is when there's not enough sun and wind to keep the lights on with just renewables and storage. Surplus, that's a cost issue. We're going to talk about what to do about the surplus. Now, for dark comms, I know some of you really want to know as much as possible about this. I have an intern, one of my interns, Kirya Miller, did a 7-minute summary. It came out today on YouTube. If you search in YouTube, Alternatives to Natural Gas Generation Platte River Power Authority, you'll see the summary. There's also a 20-minute version of this that gets into more detail for those of you that just don't think 7 minutes is enough on this topic, where she explains dark comms, shows what the modeling shows us and how to meet the dark comms. Platte River Power Authority said in their plan, we need to do something about the dark comms. Here's our placeholder. We know there are other alternatives, but here's our placeholder, which is a $140 million new natural gas plant. And these are the alternatives to that. Great video, worth watching. While I'm talking about interns, I want to talk about heat pumps for a second. How much energy does a heat pump use if a heat pump pumps when it's cold? That's the subtitle. The real title, interns Will Ballin and Kirya Miller, and their work is ongoing. We don't have a release on this yet, but if you're interested in this topic, come and contact me. Air versus ground source heat pump impact on the grid in cold climates. We're getting hourly data on air, ground source heat pumps, and natural gas systems. Okay, let's talk about surplus. When you get above about 20 or 30% renewable solar and wind in an electric grid, you start having surplus. Here's why. The sun doesn't shine full blast all the time. The wind doesn't blow full blast all the time. And electricity use, sometimes it's big and sometimes it's small. When these are big and this is small, you're going to have surplus. If you can sell the surplus even for cheap, you can keep the rates low for people. If you don't, then you throw it away, because that's what happens on electric grids, is you throw it away, and that costs us money. We'll get back to this idea in a little bit. Let's talk about electric cars and rapid transition for this. This is a Chevy Bolt again. We talked about this, 10 years, $15,000 total savings on an electric car. Let's look at a bus. Oh, before we do that though, it's good that I have an outline here to keep me straight. So this is my opinion. In a big audience, I would ask, oh, what do people think is the most important of these? So what's important for a rapid transition to electric transportation for cutting greenhouse gases? And most of the studies you see will be about number of vehicles converted, or most of the plans. So the state of Colorado has a plan for almost 1 million electric vehicles by 2030. I'm really not very interested in those numbers. Because a car could be driven, 3 miles a week, and that's not a very interesting thing. I think these are much more important. They're roughly equivalent, fuel used and miles driven. You can see the vast amount of gasoline equivalent that per year a transit bus uses versus these others topics. So let's talk about them. Transit buses, 34,000 miles per year is average in the United States. We can easily calculate the fuel cost is 11,500. What's interesting is the maintenance costs on diesels are really high. In fact, it exceeds the fuel savings. Over 10 years, that's just about $500,000 of savings, and that's more than the cost of most of the electric buses that are out there. And every single bus manufacturer knows they must be competing in the electric bus space because of this. These are mostly diesel and have lots of miles. We want to focus on those, but we want to get here too, because when we look at the statistics, 60% of transportation greenhouse gas emissions come from light trucks and cars. In fact, if you remember this, just it's a little hard to see here. Here's the light duty vehicles. This size is proportional. It's the biggest block that's on here. 60% of the biggest column, which is transportation for greenhouse gases, is from light duty vehicles. And these are the vehicles that are going to be easiest for us to electrify. So when we talk about electrifying 80%, oh, I want to show you one more thing about that. And that's air transport here. It may be a little hard to see, but this little block here, that's going to be hard to convert. So that's why when we talk about electrifying, we say 80% of transportation. That excludes the air transport and a bunch of the vehicles also. And so we want to start with the light duty, high mileage, and high energy use, high maintenance cost use vehicles. And of course, we know we can do that. So rapid transition. This shows the curves. They're called S curves because they look like little funny S's for different technologies over time. So from 1960 to about 1980, you've got up to almost 80% penetration for color TVs. The reason I like this is the technology already existed. Yeah, these were a lot more expensive when they first started. I remember when my family got our color TV in 1961 and how much it cost. And we still did it. And it's because it was better. And that's what electric vehicles are, better. In fact, we see very rapid growth in market share from 1% of global electric light duty vehicle sales in 2015 to 4.5% in 2020. And it's expected to grow enormously. Car and Driver in February said the dribble of electric cars and plug-in launches has turned into an avalanche of news about accelerated EV timelines and emissions reduction goals. New York Times said an electric trickle is turning into a flood. That was 2 days ago. As many as 100 new electric models are coming to showrooms, and Volkswagen, General Motors, and Ford are floating promises of all electric lineups within a decade. What do people say about e-cars? Well, we already know about 3 and 4. You need to know that 60% of households have 2 or more cars in the United States. When one of them is an electric, this is based on a survey done by the American Automobile Association, not me or the Sierra Club, of 1,100 electric car owners. An amazing 90% of driving of that household goes to electricity. That means 9 out of 10 times that household is taking their electric car in preference to their gasoline car. This is another reason why the transition is going to happen much faster than the number of vehicles sold. Electric car owners almost never run out of charge. 75% of charging is at home, and we're going to see a big chunk, I think another 10 or 20% charging at work. And 96%, and this is another astonishing number if you know anything about new technologies, 96% say my next car will plug in. And I just saw a poll that said 99% electric car owners will plug in. Another reason, got to have a cat story, right? Shh, don't disturb the cat. This is a true story. Buddy the cat used to hate driving in the old car because it made that nasty groaning sound, growling sound that the gasoline engine made. But now Buddy loves to purr along with his new electric car. It's a cat, right? It's his car. These are reasons why people say, this is our best car so far. Fun, I hear that a lot. They're super fast. Delight to drive. Let's talk about this range and recharging issue. In 2015, my wife and I bought our first electric car, a Nissan Leaf. It had 80 miles of realistic range. In 2019, late 2019, we test drove 5 practical electric cars, all of them having a range of 240 miles or more. These are all surprisingly cost competitive, even the base Tesla Model 3. We settled on this one for a bunch of reasons. Ask in the question time, and I'll be happy to answer. In 2021, we now have the Mach-E is available for sale, the VW ID4, Volvo Recharge. Within the next year or less, Hyundai, Kia, Toyota, that's basically all these auto manufacturers that you've heard of, and a whole bunch of more that you haven't heard of, plan their next electric vehicle. Putting 240 miles in perspective, that's round trip from Denver to Pueblo or Vail without recharging. In 2020, we had electric cars for sale at 370 miles of range, and 500 miles is coming very soon. Every car maker, at least everyone that I know of, has electric cars and trucks either now or coming soon, and most have stopped development on their combustion engines. If I was you, I'd worry about buying a new combustion engine vehicle because they're going to be obsolete really soon. You'll be kicking yourself in 5 or 10 years within the life of the car. Ford says its electric F-150 pickup will be cheaper to own, faster, and more powerful than any truck we've ever made. Okay, recharging. Most of it happens at home. But if you're going on that cannonball run from coast to coast, the record right now is Tesla at 45 hours. If you really want a cannonball run, you need a Tesla, although the charging networks for other cars is improving very, very rapidly. But fast charging varies with the car, the internal charging capability, the battery size, and the charger capability itself. But most people will do medium and slow charging at home or at work. By the way, I just released a 2-minute video on electric vehicle charging that talks about slow, medium, and fast charging and what they look like and what their rate is. Let's talk about the best place to use and store the surplus. We've actually looked at this and modeled this a fair amount now. So this is how how long the storage lasts and how it's used. For electric cars, you can have 4 days. That isn't down to 0. That's down to halfway. We'll talk about that more in a minute. Hot water heater, keeping you in hot water 1 to 2 days. And preheating and pre-cooling homes and businesses. You hear a lot about this. For the electric cars, it's 30 miles. If it's 30 miles, we actually know how much energy they use. We know how many vehicles there are. So about 30% of total electricity usage will be consumed by transportation. That's a giant amount. A lot less, still significant, but a lot less for hot water heaters. And here we don't know, but I have interns modeling this. That's the heat pump story. So let's talk about time of renewables and cheap to charge. So time of renewables, TOR. Manage electricity use to maximize sun, wind, and hydro. We've heard about demand management for a while, but utilities, when they talk about this, that's mostly been about reducing demand and shifting it to later. We, in fact, might want to get ahead of the game with renewables because we can actually predict pretty well what both the total electricity usage will be hour by hour. Utilities have been doing that for 100 years. And we also have gotten very good at predicting wind and solar in advance, particularly a day ahead and a few hours ahead. Time of renewables is demand shifting to maximize renewables and minimize fossil fuels. Now, look, if you're not doing this actively, then you're maximizing fossil fuel use in the United States. So this is from one of our models. This is based on actual Platte River Power Authority data. This is 1 day. The red line, that's our electricity use hour by hour. Here's the evening peak. The lighter green, that's renewable generation that's being used to meet the load. Here we're charging batteries on surplus renewables that would otherwise be surplus if we didn't have that big battery that PRPA is planning to install. Here's some surplus renewables. Here's where we're discharging the battery, and here's where we use natural gas backup with this scenario. Remember, this is about 85% renewables, so we have some natural gas backup. Well, this is where we want to fully charge our electric cars, and here we don't want to charge here at all if we can avoid it. Now, I have this charger from Enelex in my garage for about 3 years now. This is a normal charge, what a normal charging session looks like. It comes up, it runs flat, it drops off. But if you're charging off of surplus renewables, it might look something like this. This is actually coming from a screenshot of my app on my car, but you can't really do this in Colorado. It's California data. I'm getting lost in that. I'll come back to that in question and answer if anybody has any questions, if I wasn't clear. Okay, but this is what it looks like, and you get paid to charge smarter. We just found out about 2 weeks ago about an application in the United Kingdom where ZapMap is offering free charging off of the surplus, free electricity when Britain is generating an abundance of solar and wind power, electric car charging customers get alerted for a 4-hour flash window coming up when they can charge their electric vehicle for free. Free, that's the key word. That really gets people's excitement. If you want to push renewables, you want to push electric vehicle transportation, the amount of free earned media that you will get just by saying you get free charging on the surplus, and that happens a lot, will make a big difference in terms of pushing electric vehicle transportation. Okay, 24/7 renewable electricity. Google the words Google 24/7 renewable. That's where I first heard about this concept. And now Biden's picked it up. It's actually in his planning now. That means time of renewables. It's not what people usually talk about. We're at 100% renewables now. That's not real. It's over a year. It's better than nothing, but it's over a year generated anywhere. The electricity generated here. It's not necessarily electricity that that company is using. 24/7 means renewables every hour generated regionally. You have to use time of renewables thinking. Use electricity when the renewables are. Okay, you remember this 240 miles of range? When you do a model, just a mathematical expression of what we hope is the real world, no model is perfect. Certainly not ours, and nobody else's is either. We assume 240 miles of range, that you always plug in every night, and you always wake up to 120 miles, 50% of a tank. And for most of us, that's plenty. That's all we need. Anytime you want, I want to drive down to Pueblo and back, you can override for a full charge. And we assumed 30 miles per day. And when there's surplus, and we make it, maybe it's free to charge or cheap to charge, that you fill her up into 240 miles of range. Now, it takes a while to figure out conceptually how to make a model, and sometimes it takes a long time to implement. In the case of this, it took us almost a year to figure out the idea of how to implement this in our model, and it took us less than a day to actually implement it. And the next chart that I'm going to show you is actually almost the first chart that we generated. And when we saw it, we said, this can't possibly be true. Nobody gets 90% of charging on the surplus right out of the gate. It doesn't happen that way. But let me explain what this is. Wind and solar for Platte River Power Authority for 2023, 60% renewables, that's where they'll be. They have the contracts in hand for this. 20,000 plugins. What does this chart mean? This is every single hour of the year. Leftover surplus, that's the dark green spikes that you see here. The smaller spikes that are purple, that's the cheap to charge. We're going from half full to full. And the dark blue, that's going to be fossil generation in Colorado. And here's the only dark blue that we have. This is where you've got to charge because there was no surplus during those periods of time with this mix of renewables. 85% looks a lot different. We said this is wrong. And it took us a while to figure this out. You have to think backwards. Suppose we're full. Last night, it was cheap to charge. I've got 240 miles of range. How long before the next time that I have to charge? 4 days, maybe. 4 days, that's 120 miles to get back down to here, 30 miles a day, 4 days. But actually, the fourth day, we don't charge because it's only when we're below 120 miles. It takes 5 days before we actually have to must charge with fossils. So 5 days. So when we look at that graph we saw before, here's 4 days. There was no must charging. Here's where we have more than 4 days. And we had to have always wake to fossil charging on our electric vehicle. We ran up to 95% with Platte River Power Authority. That's not where they say they'll be in 2030. That's where we hope they'll be. 200,000 plugins, 95% of non-commercial charging using half the surplus. Commercial vehicles and buses would use about 3/8 more of the surplus, and about 1/8 of the original surplus would still be available for other uses. I've already told you, this is the charger in my garage. This does this now. It won't do it in Colorado with Colorado electricity because no utility supports this. That is time of renewables. And when you use something that has to be thrown away, curtailed, which is what Excel does with their surplus electricity, Platte River Power Authority calls surplus must sell. Because if you don't sell it, costs are going to be high. I've got about 4 minutes left, 5 minutes left here for the end of the talk. So all I'm going to do is summarize everything. This is a fantastic change that we can do this, and it's because of the bid storage and battery. So let's summarize. Here are our topics. We know what drives change, what stalls change, and what doesn't help very many people, and that there are big savings on electrifying transportation. In fact, giant savings over 10 years, including maintenance. That there are ways to look at data that help us understand what our action plan might be, what our action plan is, the massive savings that we get in terms of cost, minus 30% in greenhouse gases, by making these transitions very quickly, that electricity can be done very, very quickly. And the reason is because of cost of renewables. We have studies that show the entire country. In 2035, in addition to talking about technology, they also talk about what policy is required to drive these changes, both at the federal level and at the state level, excuse me. Mass production works. We've got .coms, and we have to cope with them to keep the lights on, and there are ways to do that. We have heat pump transitions that we need to rapidly transition, but number of vehicles converted. Oh, there was a article just the other day that talked about, oh, we can't ever get there until 2050 because there are too many vehicles. It's the miles driven, folks, not the number of vehicles. The massive savings from diesel vehicles, that adoption of technology can happen very, very fast. It can happen slower too, but there's no reason why we can't be like color TVs. That when you have 60% of households with 2 or more cars, one is electric, the vast majority of their miles in that household are on electricity because they're fun and quick and clean. Range is improving dramatically. We know where to put the surplus and what time of renewables looks like, charging our electric vehicles here, not charging here. That's all there is to it. That there are people doing this, including for free in Britain, and what the modeling shows us for this, and that car chargers exist. So I'm ready for questions here.
Let's start out with, so how much surplus electricity is there?
Well, I'm glad you asked that, as it turns out. It's always a challenge to get everything in. I wanted to put this in the talk, and it was getting to be too long. And so, I have a set of slides that are already prepared for answering some of these key questions. We'll see if I have enough slides for most of the questions. Okay, so curtailed. That's the same thing as dumping the electricity. You can't store electricity except in something like a battery. And remember that the modeling that we have includes large amounts of storage, and even so, with the modeling with storage, we still have significant amount of curtailment. But this is Excel talking about right now. So the company, this is PUC staff witness Joe McCabe. Joe's an engineer, electrical engineer, said that curtailment volumes that in 2021 that they anticipate that 950,000 megawatt hours of electricity will be curtailed, mostly from their wind farms. To put that in perspective, he did the calculations on this and said that that would be like taking all of the electricity from a large 362 megawatt wind farm and throwing it away. That's what we're talking about. We did some very simple math that amount of electricity over the course of the year is enough to charge 300,000 electric vehicles. This is not a joke. This is a real number. 30 miles per day for the entire year. Very simple math. In fact, some of you have seen the numbers already that would allow you to make this calculation. Making an estimate, it's hard to know what Excel charges us for electricity, but that 950,000 megawatt hours at $40 a megawatt hour would be about $43 million a year. That's what's costing us, because if you throw it away, it's junk, okay? It's still, somebody had to be paid for it. Even Excel owns it. They still got to be paid for it. It's electricity we should have gotten use of. If the production tax credit for wind is in effect for that wind farm, that has to be paid back as well. And that's about $24 million more. Next question.
Hi, Ken. This is Julie. Thanks for the great presentation. A lot of good explanations of complicated things that were helpful to me. I have a question here. Will it be necessary for PRPA to build a rice plant, or can they use peakers until they reach 100%?
So the rice plant is a reciprocal internal combustion engine. It's usually driven off of natural gas. So that's the natural gas generator that I was talking to. In their plan, they did put $140 million for a natural gas turbine, a new natural gas, sorry, not turbine, rice plant, reciprocal engine. But they said it was a placeholder. They said that we know there's all these other different alternatives. They didn't list the alternatives exactly. Kirya Miller, and the link is should be, it can be sent out right now, has actually done 2 videos, a 7-minute video that's a summary of a 20-minute video. So you choose which one you want to watch. Watch the 7-minute, and when you like it that well, please, by the way, continue to share those with your networks and like them. It makes a difference. It goes into detail and shows what our modeling showed as we looked at hourly data. It shows where the worst dark columns were and how we could keep the lights on. That's why they needed this, is when there's times of the year when there isn't enough renewable energy for meeting load and enough storage. So there is an answer out there. I'm not going to go into it because Kirya does such a good job on it. If you still have questions, email me.
Okay, Ken, thanks. So Rick Cohen wants to know, why did you buy the electric car you did?
It's pretty simple. We actually had placed an order on a Tesla Model 3 because we liked the fact that you could charge it. And then we discovered 2 things about it. It's a somewhat bigger vehicle. It's almost 12 inches longer than our Kia, and it's wider. And it wouldn't fit in the spot that we had for it in the garage. That was the first problem. The second problem is my wife is 5'0" and weighs 90 pounds literally. And although she could reasonably safely drive the Model 3, a friend of ours has a Model 3 and let us drive it for better part of a half a day. That she was just much more comfortable inside the Kia. But the cost difference was pretty minimal. There wasn't it was a couple $1,000 difference in cost. It wasn't a giant difference in cost between the 2 of those. I got to tell you, the Kia is actually lighter than the Tesla, and at least in specification has the same torque. It doesn't get quite as much efficiency, doesn't get as many miles per kilowatt hour, and it doesn't have the charging network. Definitely does not have the charging network that Tesla does. But otherwise, it's a great car. We've taken it on several longer drives, took it up to Crested Butte, no problems at all. We did a fast charge in Crested Butte. It was half a block from the restaurant that we had chosen. We didn't choose the restaurant based on where the fast charger was. By the time we were done with our appetizers, it was done filling up its charge. And then the rest of the time we went on medium and slow chargers, some of which were, by the way, were free from the city of Crested Butte, which was very nice of them.
Yeah, a follow-up on that is Rick's asking about V2G, vehicle to grid. What's the state of that here in the United States? Okay, so first is Kirya's video actually uses V2G as an example of one of the different measures that we looked at a little bit. The state of that is that it's not very far along. We have some test cases. There's one in Boulder, back behind the North Boulder Rec Center. There's some others that are showing up here and there where you're taking and you charge up the vehicle, the battery in an electric car, and then you use it to help with the dark calm. But here's the basics. When Platte River Power Authority put together their plan, they had about this much storage. It's big storage for utility, and that's for 2030. But if we took and looked at where the plan, the state plan for electric vehicle electrification, for vehicle electrification, I'll get it out here sooner or later. The number of vehicles, that's about 1 million for the state of Colorado by 2030. The share inside of Platte River Power Authority's service territory, the amount of storage was almost 3 times as much as the storage that utility would have at that point in time. And that's based on pretty conservative battery size. The battery sizes we know are going up and up and up and up. And that there's actually going to be a lot more battery storage rolling around in the cars than the utilities are likely to have. Now, that might not be strictly true at 95 or particularly at 99% for that, but if they can figure out a way, so this is the thing with the rice plant, the backup natural gas generation for PRPA, twice a year, $140 million.
Let's figure out a way that uses that $140 million to use those vehicle to grid, that vehicle to grid capability. But no, it's not very far along. There's some challenges along the way. All of the charging standards include it, but not every car includes the capability within the charging standard. And certainly not every charger allows it.
Can we have a comment question from Ann Ross? She says, I think you said the juice box is not available in Colorado because no utility in Colorado supports it. Is that what you said? And can you explain this?
Actually, that's not correct. You can go buy a juice box off of Amazon or any of the different places. It works just fine. What it doesn't have is the capability to do time of renewables pricing, where you get to charge for cheap.
Okay.
And so that's the issue on that. But it's a perfectly fine charger. It does have the capability built in, and when a utility in Colorado chooses to support it, then it'll be worthwhile moving to that. They actually have a second option, which doesn't get you any money back, but does look at this. There's a nonprofit organization that actually looks at different areas of the grid and says how clean it is or isn't, and that the juice box supports. So NLX is the company, ENELX, is and that it charges on the cleanest power. It doesn't necessarily charge, but it doesn't give you any discount from that. But that in and of itself is a kind of time of renewables. So, and I should have looked this up. I didn't think to do this, is whether that is available, in Colorado for that capability. So one of you that's out there might look it up and send the answer in the chat to our moderators here. These are great questions, by the way. These are all awesome questions.
Yeah, here comes another one. Martin Volker wants to know if you would weigh in on the debate between distributed and utility scale solar. Chris Clack's modeling shows that once distribution costs are properly accounted for, distributed rooftop solar comes out to be cheaper.
Yes, Chris Clack's study does show that, and you know as much as I'm going to go into on there. Chris's studies are amazingly detailed and require a great deal of thought. I'm looking for a particular slide to show you here. The problem is I didn't load it up into this deck, and if I change decks, we run risk of angering the Zoom gods, and I'm just not willing to do that. You can see all the slides that I've got that are beyond the talk here, so there's some other slides that I might come into, but I'm sorry I don't have that particular one. What it shows is every rooftop in the city of Boulder, and if I remember, and maybe my moderators can help me remember, I'll stick it into the deck that we send off to the group, that we make downloadable for the group. For anybody that wants, it shows every single rooftop in the city of Boulder, not just the rooftop, but where the good solar is. And what you discover is that when you add up all the good solar, not the shaded areas, but the sunny areas, you discover a couple of things. The first thing you discover is that there's enough to do more than what we probably want in terms of solar for the city of Boulder on the rooftops. That ignores the giant parking lots. The second thing is that you discover that a lot of the concentration, it's not really surprising, it's on those big commercial roofs in the commercial areas. And we know that a bigger install is still distributed, is more cost effective than a lot of smaller ones. And we have Chris Clack's study saying that in fact, it's cheaper to go with distributed. So from my standpoint, it's much better to go with distributed. I don't want to take farmland and make it into solar panels. I don't want to take open spaces and make them into solar panels. Roofs are already compromised. There are already places I don't care very much about. And what's more is that it's where the electricity is being used. It's closest to where the electricity is being used. So you don't pay as much for transmission losses and distribution losses as you would if the solar farm is way down in Durango or wherever it is that you might install one. So I'm a big proponent of distributed solar. And as we figure out how to install it better and the price continues to fall, it'll get cheaper. Plus, I own it, not the utility. I love that.
Ron Larson has a question. Can your scenario include CDR, carbon dioxide removal?
CDR meaning?
Carbon dioxide removal.
Oh, there's nothing specific in this that talks about carbon dioxide removal. So there's things like biochar and other kinds of things that talk about where you take and use biochar as an amendment to soil. Ron Larson's been a big activist for that particular piece of things. I don't talk about it because it's the first rule of holes, HOLES. The first rule of holes is if you're in a hole and you don't want to be there, stop digging. We're digging ourselves a giant climate hole. The thing to do is stop burning fossil fuels first. And we can work on carbon capture and sequestration or other kinds of ways to do carbon dioxide removal as we go. But the first thing we need to do is stop making bazillions of tons a year of carbon dioxide, adding that to the atmosphere. So I'm a proponent, hey, maybe some of that surplus can be used for carbon capture and storage.
Yeah. How about hydrogen? Phil Wardwell says, what about using surplus to produce green hydrogen as a form of storage?
Okay, so I have heard so much about hydrogen in the last few years that it's not even funny. Look, I don't care what it is, what the technology is, as long as it's cheap and reliable and works. That doesn't mean that we have to be stupid about looking forward to different things. I'm not saying hydrogen is stupid. I'm saying we can be smart. That's what I really should be saying about what we look at. I don't want to say stupid about anybody or anything. So I apologize for that. So hydrogen has a fundamental problem that I see that I haven't heard discussed very much. The people that seem to be most excited about hydrogen seems to be the gas pipeline companies, because I think they see that as a possible use for their gas pipeline. They may know this already. So here's the problem that I see with hydrogen. Here's jet fuel. That's about the most concentrated energy source of that we have per gallon. So a very concentrated energy source. And I'm comparing it to liquid hydrogen. Now, liquid hydrogen is a giant expense to make, and that it's not something you're going to put in through any of our existing pipelines without completely redoing them. In fact, it's impractical to do that. But it's the densest form of hydrogen. It's the densest that the hydrogen can be. The BTUs per gallon for jet fuel is 4 times the BTUs per gallon of liquid hydrogen. It's a loss when we talk about energy density in volume. But when we talk about energy density in mass or weight, BTUs per pound, hydrogen's a wonderful win. Now, this is liquid hydrogen. Gaseous hydrogen is not going to be anything nearly, well, no, it'll be the same because it's weight, mass, right? So it doesn't matter what the density is. It matters what the weight of the material is. Lightest element, you get a lot of BTUs per pound. That's my first concern. It's not the mass, it's the volume. What this means for a pipeline is where you can take and put this much gas through a pipeline right now with natural gas, or jet fuel, you're probably going to have 3 or 4 pipelines to get the same BTUs, the same amount of energy in hydrogen. What does it look like if we redesign an airplane to run on liquid hydrogen? That's boggling my mind to begin with. On compressed hydrogen, if it takes 4 times as much or 5 times as much space inside the airplane, is there any room for passengers? I don't know the answer to these questions. These are questions we can answer right now. We don't need to wait to answer these questions. There's a second problem, which is round trip efficiency, kilowatt hours in to kilowatt hours out through a process. Now, it turns out battery storage and pumped hydro are an amazing 80% round trip efficiency. 90% in and 90% out, real close, both of them. This is based on actual utility scale battery storage and utility scale pumped hydro. When you go through hydrolysis to a fuel stack, that's electricity in to make hydrogen, to a fuel stack, and you ignore transport and storage and compression, you get 30 to 40% round trip efficiency. This isn't a deal stopper if the cost of the energy is low enough, but this is something that needs to be factored into the consideration. So hydrogen, if it can work, sure, but answer these questions for me first, please. And we can do that now. If anybody's interested in volunteering with me, or you know somebody that would be a good intern to work on these problems, I'd be love to get these questions answered. These are questions we can answer now. It's not easy to get these answers, but it's not impossible either.
Ken, we have a question from Marie Venner. When you talk about the savings, is avoiding the Excel 7% increase in profit annually included in that?
The savings from, well, if you own the solar, then potentially you're protected to that to some degree, but Excel is going to want to get that from everybody, even solar panel owners, and they're working very hard to do that against our better interest. But in terms of the savings, it's true, Excel gets a profit off of what they do. There's really no way around that at the moment, short of doing away with Excel as they currently organized. And many of you know that I was very actively engaged for the City of Boulder's municipalization effort for a number of years, and that we worked very hard to break away and were not successful. That doesn't mean that it's impossible to do that, doesn't mean that we shouldn't revisit this. Excel charges an awful lot, and they are totally vested in making this transition as expensive as possible by proposing lots of new natural gas generation, when in fact there are increasing numbers of studies that say we don't need it. There are lots of alternatives that are out there that should be explored first that are probably cheaper. And that's because Excel makes a profit based on their investments in capital. They're guaranteed a profit off of the investments in capital. All of their other expenses, including borrowing money to buy capital, are covered, guaranteed. That's the way that's the deal. That's the rules. And you got to remember that Excel is always looking for the most expensive solution to a particular problem. Now, that's not being totally fair to them. They do pay attention to costs, but they are much more incentivized to go with something that gives them a profit than something that gives them with less profit. And so we have to figure out how to balance that. That's the theory of what the Public Utilities Commission is supposed to do. And they are successful some of the time. But they didn't insist on time of renewables during their transportation electrification docket. The Public Utilities Commission didn't.
Yeah. All right, Ken, speaking of Excel, it's the largest utility in the state. Why are you using PRPA data instead of Excel's data? Wouldn't that be more appropriate?
Is this like a lowball question? Is this a plant out there? I don't know who asked this question. Doesn't matter. The great question. The answer is that, well, it's because Excel doesn't give us this kind of data. Excel is like everything's highly confidential. Everything is highly confidential. That curtailment number that I showed you came out of a docket. When it first came out, it was redacted. All those numbers that I showed you that I talked about, the wind farm size, the number of megawatt hours, that was redacted. It was information that wasn't available to the public. You had to have highly confidential status in order to see that. And if you were to leak it, Excel would sue your sorry little butt to the heaven and back again, okay? What happened was, now I don't know what happened. I don't have any inside information on the Public Utilities Commission. No, so Joe McCabe, he's inside the PUC, highly confidential status. And so he asked the question and got the answer, because the commission frowns when legitimate questions are asked by their staff and they're not answered. But it was highly confidential. And then about a month later, suddenly it comes out as not being highly confidential anymore. The only thing I can think of is that the PUC's attorneys went to Excel's attorneys and said, we're going to order you to release this. Wouldn't you really rather do it voluntarily? And that's in fact what happened. Can I prove that? Oh no, I have no inside information on this. But I've heard of things like that before. And it's the only thing that makes any sense. They wouldn't have made it public if they didn't need to. Well, they shouldn't have any private information. They have no competition. There's no competition to them. Why do they have anything that's private? Why is there anything that isn't a public number published regularly? Hourly data. PRPA, they give us the hourly data. What can you say? Great people.
Ken,
I want to add one more thing.
Okay, go ahead.
Excel in their latest bill says in big letters, we are leading the energy transition in Colorado. I was going to say a different B word, but baloney. Platte River Power Authority is leading the energy transition in Colorado because they think they can do it at the lowest costs in the state and some of the country, at the highest reliability, higher than Excel's, And that's leading in a transition. And they did it pretty much voluntarily on their own in terms of putting this plan together. And they have a history of not just a little bit, but way overachieving on their environmental goals as the costs come down and they see how they can do it. Next question. These are super questions.
And no personal opinion being shared at all.
Not a one.
I have a couple questions here. I'll do this one. What do you think about the idea of the fact that Xcel, as Paul mentioned, is the biggest utility, investor-owned utility? And what do you think about the need to break up Xcel's territory across the state?
I think it's not just break up their territory. I think it's take away the profit motive. Look, our lives exist on this. You know, some of you know this, is that that rates for natural gas and electricity absolutely skyrocketed to 200 times their normal cost in Texas during the cold snap. What a lot of people don't know is natural gas spiked that way in Colorado. In fact, Xcel in 4 days racked up $600 million in Xcel of natural gas charges. That's something like the amount of cost of natural gas for the rest of the year put together during the cold snap. And they don't owe a cent of that. That's going to come through on our bills. Is that a market success? Somebody made a heck of a lot of money. I don't think it was Xcel actually in this case. It's the people that actually had the natural gas that did that. So I think this is a giant market failure. People died in Texas. We know we're going to have increasing amounts of extreme weather because of climate change. And we have utilities that are totally unprepared and have the wrong incentive of what to put together. Their incentive is not for the lowest cost solution and the highest reliability. Yeah, they get reliability in there, but all of their modeling is based on the highest profit solution that also has reasonable costs, because we'll squawk if the price is too high, and that gets us to high reliability. So yeah, I think it's not only bust them up, but change the rules. I don't know what it's going to take to do that. Maybe killing 111 people in Colorado might be a good thing. No, that's never a good thing. That might be what it takes.
All right, Ken, I don't know how much you've been keeping up on local politics, but Steve Douglas is asking your opinion on Senate Bill 21-200, which is an attempt to codify the roadmap.
I'm not going to answer that because I'm not as up to date on it as I should be, and to be able to do that, you know, I've talked plenty. If somebody like one of you or Leslie wants to jump in and answer that, I'm okay with that. But otherwise, I'll continue on more specific energy-related questions. You know, I'd like to see the roadmap implemented. That's a personal opinion. Beyond that.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question here from Leslie Glustrom. She says Xcel is only proposing about 400 megawatts of storage, presumably 4-hour, in their electric resource plan, and not much demand response / management. Only 400 megawatts of storage seems low. Do you have any thoughts? And could you help us think about this?
The answer from my standpoint, by the way, we still have 37 participants, but given that it's been an hour and 15 minutes on a pretty darn technical topic, for those of you that are still listening, congratulations, you have fortitude. Okay, so the key question here is, you know, give me the tiny bit of the question here again. I lost it when I added my little comment.
Just about the 400 megawatts
yes.
in the
Okay.
electric resource plan.
So that'd be 1,600 megawatt hours of storage. Platte River Power Authority said 1,200 megawatt hours. They are 1/11 the size of Xcel. From my standpoint, they probably ought to have, Xcel probably ought to have 11 times that. So whatever 11 times 1,200 megawatt hours is, and that's not what they have. They ought to have massive amounts of demand shifting, time of renewables in their plan. PRPA doesn't have massive amounts of that, although they have a very dedicated group that is working, moving forward on that. Not very fast from my perspective. You got to try this stuff because nobody knows what works for demand shifting. We've got to try a bunch of trials very quickly so that we have experience over several years with them before we need them, before we depend on them. I think that the electric utilities think that energy imbalance markets are going to solve this issue of curtailment for them. And I don't think so. In fact, I have modeling that at least strongly suggests that that's the case. Would you like me to go into that?
Ken, Leslie here, and thank you so much. And as we get, we're down around 30 participants. If people want to unmute or whatever and just jump in, I think we can do it. Julie and Paul have done a fabulous job on the questions.
We have a couple more questions, so in consideration of people who've put them in.
Good call.
One
Yeah.
from Karen up here, Karen Condiff up here in Boulder County. My daughter and her husband live in an apartment in Denver. They would love to own an electric car, but there's nowhere for them to charge. What is the solution for non-homeowners to be able to drive EVs?
This is very tricky. So one answer is rapid chargers, so fast charging. So you go and, if you have 240 miles range, most of us are going to charge once a week, maybe once every, 5 or 6 days. And so a rapid charger becomes practical for somebody, and you'd figure out what times make the most sense for you. The next option is that, in fact, Excel's Transportation Electrification Plan has grants for installing chargers in multifamily units, multifamily dwellings, and also the state has grants for small businesses that have charging spots. Charging at work becomes very practical. That's a perk that I think people will want. For most of us, you don't have to charge every single day. If you have a medium speed charger, what's called a level 2 charger, that gives you enough charge in a day's work for most people for about a week of driving around. And so you can share that with other people. Maybe that Monday is your day for using the bank of level 2 electric chargers at work. So these are all solutions for this. I'm not saying it's simple. I'm saying there's a lot of money out there to make these changes. And there's one more thing that I found out about, a piece of policy that I found out just recently. There's about 8 states that have right to charge legislation that addresses multifamily situations and homeowners association that say a homeowners association can't block somebody from setting up a reasonable charging space for their electric car. That might mean that they have to have an assigned parking spot where they would normally have shared parking spots, for example, that they can't block that for reasonableness. Now, you can't be unreasonable about this. The person that wants the charger might have to pay for the installation. There are probably grants coming for that, particularly if you're low or moderate income. And there's all kinds of grants that are going to be out there and ways to push this forward. Tax credits. There have been tax credits for charging on and off, for charging stations on and off, federal tax credits on and off for a while now. And I expect to see more of those under the Biden administration.
I see another question in here. I'll just go ahead with it. David Burns has a question. I think he's perhaps relating it to the natural gas pricing in the Texas emergency. His question is, doesn't Excel use hedging to protect from price spikes in gas or long-term contracts to manage costs?
Well, if they spent $600 million, then at least for $600 million, they didn't have hedging for it. You have to have firm gas contracts, and for something that doesn't happen once every couple of years, in this case, this kind of event, maybe it'll start happening more frequently, then you can set up a hedged contract that says you're going to get guaranteed delivery. Now, in Texas, the electric grid was going down at the same time that the gas grid was going down. And so one of the reasons that the gas grid went as bad as it did was because some of the gas compressors are electric and they didn't have electricity. So you had a thing spiraling out of control in Texas. Didn't happen here, but I got to tell you that Platte River Power Authority was uncomfortably close to not having enough electricity. And they are taking steps to fix that quite quickly. And it wasn't that they didn't have enough generation, it's that they didn't have enough natural gas at a reasonable cost.
Okay, we have it's Steve or Christy, I'm not sure which one, Douglas, has their hand up. So if you go ahead and unmute and turn on your camera and ask your question.
Yes, this is Steve Douglas, former city council for Commerce City. I served on the Regional Air Quality Commission appointed by the governor just before I got out of council, and they still have grant money to incentivize putting in charging stations. So whatever, if you're in a multiple family or an apartment, you can go to your HOA and go to your city council member for that district and ask them to advocate for a charging station for your area. And because it's the cost is little to nothing, because there's grant money from the Volkswagen diesel settlement. So that's an option. Thank you.
Yeah, some of these are kind of secret. The state's webpage that talks about I went to this last week. In fact, I asked the question on Electric Vehicle Coalition call, and they said, "Oh, there are rebates." And I said, "Oh, I'm going to a hotel, and we arranged for me to do low speed plug in the wall charging, and it'd be really nice if they could get some kind of grant. Are there any grants out there for them?" And they said, "Yeah, we've got them." Sent me to a web page. The web page had print this small, literally. You can't see how small it was. I could barely read it. And somewhere in there, in the 400 words that were on the page, it did say that in fact there were grants available. And I sort of sent them back an email that said, "It's awesome that you have these grants. How about a landing page that's specific for the travel industry, hotels and motels, to get grants for this so that it's really clear exactly what it is they need to do. It's honed in for them." That's what you do when you want a lot of people to do something. So we got a ways to go in terms of doing this. The good news is that the grants are available. But I don't know how you would have found out about this grant if we didn't have somebody on the call that knew about it. And thank you so much, for Councilman, for your service.
I'll thank you for him. Thanks.
Yeah.
I have a question from Jim Morris. We have another person who's asked quite a few questions, so I'm skipping on to Jim's question. How do you see efforts to retrofit trucks? Let me see. Here's his question. What about autonomous vehicles? Can we prevent large corporate owners of fleets of autonomous vehicles from choosing inefficient technology that depends on very expensive generation owned by Xcel?
I think that we're going to have trouble making that one stick because of there's people want to have choice when they can. I would argue that though expensive generation from Xcel is a problem, the solution to that is the Public Utilities Commission or splitting up Xcel, a much bigger lift, much bigger, harder thing to do. That because generation itself is not very expensive, particularly if it happens to be coming from renewables, it's the cheapest source of energy, of electricity at this point in time. And that we can get more of that if we go to time of renewables. This is where time of renewables is essential for making this transition as cheaply as possible, because Xcel has plans to dump curtailed electricity. They don't care about it. They consider the amount of electricity that they are dumping right now as being minimal. Do you think $60 million a year of your money is minimal? I don't think so, but they don't care. They don't have to because they don't pay it. We do. So the answer is I would like to see them converting vehicles to electricity. Autonomous vehicles, that's a different question. I have a lot of concerns about that. On the other hand, we're pretty clever. I assume sooner or later we will figure out autonomous trucks. But that's not the energy that fuels them. That's how they're driven.
I have another question here from Martin Volker. How do you see efforts to retrofit trucks to drive on batteries? For example, lightning systems in Colorado and the fact that they're accelerating commercial vehicle transition by retrofitting electric drivetrains on trucks.
I don't care how you do it as long as you electrify it. And in fact, you don't even have to electrify it all the way. Do a hybrid plug-in so that you get 30, 40, 50 miles of electric range Most people, most of their range goes on to that 40 or 50 miles. Most of their miles go onto that 40, 50. And then they want to do the cannonball run. They've got a gasoline engine to do that, as long as it makes sense to do that. But I'll tell you that some of the manufacturers that used to make plugins no longer do, because the electric vehicles, the all electrics, outsell the plugins significantly. They're good enough now for most people most of the time. And you know, if charging is not good enough for you, you're saving so much money, you can probably go rent a nasty, slow, noisy gasoline, expensive gasoline car to drive, do the cannonball run. And your greenhouse gases don't go up very much. Most of our miles, most people, most of our miles are local, 80, 90% of them. Maybe we should take 2 more questions here and call it a night. I do actually have another, amusingly enough, another Zoom at 7:30. So
We do have a question that could either be handled by you or Leslie, and it does relate to some important legislation that's going to be discussed tomorrow. This question is, in the wake of Boulder abandoning municipal utility, is there any progress on CCA or CCE in Colorado?
I know that there is a bill being heard on that. I know Larry Milosevic or Leslie would be the right people to answer that question and to say exactly where it is. It needs support like any bill does, and I definitely think it's a great idea to pursue that. And CCA is Community Choice Aggregation. I think this one's being called CCE, Community Choice Energy, which allows a community to choose their own electricity supplier beyond their incumbent electric utility. And needless to say, Excel probably doesn't like it very much. Maybe just a tiny bit they don't like it.
Yeah, I can jump in and say that the CCE study bill has been introduced, and the House Energy and Transportation Committee is going to take that up tomorrow.
One more question?
We don't have any more in the chat. Maybe
Yes.
someone will, oh yeah, you got
Yes,
her
I have
hand
one
raised
more.
there. Okay.
Yes, I'm sorry. I have one more question.
Hi, Steve.
I'm sorry. This is Steve Douglas. I was listening to the United Power Board meeting today, and one of the members is concerned that Elon Musk is, since he bought Sunrun, you know, the solar panels, that they want to get into the electricity business by going through the homeowners that have residential solar, and then somehow controlling their use of solar, and then also trying to maybe apply for the Public Utility Commission and become an energy company based off the residential power that's coming off the homes. Do you think that's possible?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, it's already happening in places. Tesla's already owns storage where it's merchant to bid into competitive markets, electricity markets. So they're already being approved in certain states, not in Colorado yet that I'm aware of. But yeah, and it doesn't take too much intelligence to figure, in fact, we have in the state, it's not Tesla doing this, but we have Holy Cross Energy has a program where they are providing Tesla power walls to homeowners, particularly ones that are out there long ways. They're rural co-op. Some of their distribution lines are very long. At the end of the distribution lines, you lose electricity a fair amount because of trees dropping on the power lines. And so to keep electricity up for those people, they're putting in battery storage, and they're going to use that battery storage aggregated amongst a whole bunch of homeowners to reduce their electricity costs for everybody. So, right. You know, Tesla, Elon has his moments, but you got to hand it to him in terms of driving the world towards electrification of cars. Wanting to own everything, you know, Excel owns us if we're Excel customers, and I'm not sure that I wouldn't mind seeing a choice from Elon myself. But you know, it's but not everything is a perfect decision. Not everything is a perfect solution. So
I just wanted to give a shout out to Edie Hooten, our representative from Boulder, for working with other people in the legislature to bring that CCE bill forward.
Yes, thank you very much, really to all of our electeds. We, particularly the city of Boulder, has some pretty tremendous elected officials. There are a number of really terrific, hardworking elected officials that are out there that really care about issues that certainly that I care about. Edie is my rep, and Steve Fenberg is my state senator, and Joe Neguse is my, is my U.S. representative. I got the trifecta here going. So with that, I'm going to hang up here. It's been awesome. Look for additional emails from Empower Hour. Make sure you pass on the videos, all of the videos. The more they're seen, the more they will be seen. And I'm going to add one more thing, which is I did a talk about 2 weeks ago for a group from the Rocky Mountain Association of Geologists, members in transition. This is people that are in oil and gas that need to get out of it or want to get out of it. On this, and there was about 20% overlap between this talk, but the rest of the talk is different, and we'll hopefully get the link to the video for that out to you as well, and as part of this sort of package of links that are going to come, plus a link to the slides. Thank you so much. It's been wonderful fun, great questions, and I'm happy to talk to people individually as I can, as my time allows for this. You all have a great rest of the day, and it's still light outside and such a pretty day at the end of the day.
Thanks,
Great
Ken.
presentation, Ken.
Woo!
Thank you.
Woo!
Awesome.
Thanks, Julie.
Yeah.
Thanks, Paul.
Yes.
Great job
Yeah.
with the questions.
And
Yeah,
thanks.
I've got to say, as someone who dabbles in learning a lot about energy, I just can't imagine how much time Ken spends every day keeping up to date on all this stuff. It's
I have
amazing work.
I have interns, and we are not just keeping up with the data. We are doing analysis that other people aren't or haven't gotten to yet. The imbalance markets, again, the energy imbalance markets. Utilities think that's going to work. We think there's serious doubt as to it's going to work some, but it's not going to solve their problems with curtailment. Work about 1/3 of the hours of the year, but curtailment is 100% of the hours a year problem. So 2/3 of the hours, we think curtailment's not going to work the way it is. We're trying to gather further detailed information on that topic right now. One of my interns is assigned to that. Another intern's working on time of renewables white paper on, and is also doing this for a class jointly on time of renewables and putting together legislation for it. So she's got a really excellent white paper that talks about why time of renewables is needed and provides lots of references to that, and is also putting together a section for actual model legislation for that. So if you're interested in any of these topics, contact me.
Yeah, you're late, Ken. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Awesome job, Ken. Thank you.
Thanks.